Today's conversation on the free lunch is with someone I've known for more than a decade. Someone whose story carries the weight of experience, change, and leadership over the arc of a busy life, well lived. His name is Simon Olswang. Simon is a lawyer by training, but to describe him that way is to miss almost everything that makes him remarkable. He founded Olswang in 1981. In its time, one of the leading UK law firms. But the part of Simon's story I find truly compelling is not just the success, it's the evolution, the moments when values were tested, the times he walked away from clients because the work violated a principle, painful transitions when he had to redefine who he was, the resilience required to tackle what life throws at you. In this conversation, he talks openly about all of it. His upbringing in Yorkshire, his accidental path into the law, the early days with entertainment clients, including Monty Python, Diana Ross, and the financing of the film Gandhi, the intentional philosophy behind Olswang's culture, the power of asking questions that nobody else dares to ask, and the cost of growth, politics, and succession. He shares leadership lessons shaped not by theory, but by his lived experience. Moments where integrity mattered more than the convenience, where values held firm under pressure, and where followership proved as important as leadership. This is a conversation about law, business, culture, and history. But it's also about character, loss, reinvention, and the quiet strength required to keep moving forward. It's one of the most open and reflective discussions I've had on the free lunch. Here's my conversation with Simon Olswang. All right, Simon, extremely happy to have you here as a guest on the free lunch. Our conversations broadly about leadership, but really about anything interesting. And it's really an enormous pleasure to have you. I've known you since about 2013. We were just working that out. In 2014, we really got to know each other. I was doing quality solicitors at that point, and you were on the board, I think a board advisor for Palamon. And it was a gradual process of getting to know you, but I have to say that you were fantastically helpful to me at the time when I was trying to unravel that knotty business. And in terms of your own history, which I'd really love you to tell us about, obviously you're a legal professional, you've been a lawyer for many years, and I know you've got some good stories about how you did that, but also that you founded the Olswang law firm in 1980 and continued to work with that until I think 2001. And then that went on with the Olswang name until 2017. So that's quite a legacy for the UK legal world. So maybe we should start there. You might like to tell us a little bit about your background, your upbringing. I know you were brought up in Yorkshire. I think that's interesting. But then tell us a bit about founding Olswang and kind of how you went about it.
Okay, well, it's lovely to be here. It really is. And I suppose people like talking about themselves. I grew up in Harrogate in the north of England. I went into, by default, actually, I went into accountancy. Uh-huh. I had a degree in economics and accounting, and I hated it. Mm-hmm. I hated it on the first day, and it took me a little time to get out. But whilst I was doing accounting, I was auditing some law firms, and I thought this looked really interesting.
Right.
I became a lawyer. I got articles in those days, training contract today, in a pretty interesting, primarily a property firm, but a go-go firm, as it turned out, in the West End of London. So I met my wife, who was the kid sister of one of the founding partners, and eventually I became a partner. Mm-hmm. And I think it was difficult for me, in a sense, because I was family but not family. Right. And everybody, including me, leant over backwards not to be involved. I called my brother-in-law Sir in the office.
So what year are we talking now?
We were married in '69, so we're talking about the '70s.
Okay.
By accident, I got into what became a film production practice. And it was really interesting. And I discovered that I couldn't develop it in that firm.
Right.
And I told the firm, and I did a lot of research, and I went to see the accountants, and I looked at the accounts, and I realized that the firm just couldn't grow.
Right.
And if it couldn't grow, I couldn't develop my practice.
Interesting.
I was stymied. So I gave notice. They were completely shocked, except the senior partner, the brother of my brother-in-law, was lovely. And he took me aside and he said, Simon, I did it. You can do it.
Right.
So I set up a tiny, tiny law firm. Me, two very young lawyers, one of the first word processors, and a secretary.
Right.
And then we got a girl Friday a little after that. There were 5 of us. And we were in a garret in the top of an accountant's office in Wigmore Street. And we moved then quite quickly to a palatial-looking suite of offices in Cumberland Terrace, overlooking Regent's Park.
Right.
And I don't know, it just went, it just absolutely happened.
And it was very focused on kind of advertising, entertainment, that communication.
Not in those days, not advertising, it was really screen production.
Okay.
I was dead lucky. I had Gandhi, I had the financing of the film Gandhi, and we went to India to do it. I should mention that before I left the original law firm, I had become very concerned about Britain. It was the days of 83% marginal rate of tax, 97 or 98% on so-called unearned income. Anyone who was successful left.
Yeah. And it was the time of the power cuts and things, I can remember that.
Well, that was a little earlier. I went through all that. That was 74.
Right.
And my practice, anyone who was any good went to California.
Right.
So you can't beat them, join them. I went to California. I qualified at the California bar, somehow keeping my practice going, because we didn't have iPhones then, somehow keeping my practice going in the evenings.
Wow.
And qualified at the California bar, got lots of offers, and was ready to move to California.
That's so interesting as well, because nowadays, I mean, even today, people say to me, you know, how do you manage to have clients in North America? And I was absolutely fine. We talk on Zoom. But I think perhaps in the mid-1970s, for your lawyer to be in LA when you were in London must have been unusual. So
it was very unusual. And I had a very good assistant in London, bless him, who kept things going. Anyway, I kept it going, came back, got ready to leave. Mrs. Thatcher got elected. Everything changed.
Right.
Everything. And I think she got elected in 1979.
79, yeah.
And in 1980, I gave notice to the firm finally, and I left on I think it was the end of March, it might have been the beginning, and I set up the firm.
Right. Interesting. And actually, as we'll get on to talk about leadership things in a minute, but of course, Mrs. Thatcher started off with so much promise, then had a terrible time, and then the Falklands War appeared, and she saw the opportunity, I think, for that, and said, no, we're going to go down and reclaim it. And that was really the turning point. After that, everyone loved Maggie, which was very much a leadership moment, wasn't it?
One of the things that helped me, somewhere along the road, I read David Ogilvy's Confessions of an Advertising Man. Little slim book. And it was a book of aphorisms. And there were 2 that I took out and had on my desk. One was, within every problem there lies an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, interesting for a lawyer, with every submission an admission. And I've always had those in mind. There was a third that wasn't one of his, an Indian proverb, which I also had up on the wall. You cannot cross a chasm with easy steps.
Excellent. Well, also, I would think in the mid-1970s to have, early 80s to have those things written up in your office was pretty unusual.
Probably.
Yeah. But, so actually, that's a good segue into talking about the philosophy of Olswang, because you and I have had quite long discussions about what kind of people you looked for, what they brought to the firm, how you selected people, and kind of, I think you were quite forward thinking in terms of how you constructed the firm. Can you talk about that a bit?
Mm-hmm. I know. I've always been about realizing potential. And that was the mantra, really. That was the essence of the law firm. Mm. It was to realize the potential of its people, all of them, and to enable clients to realize their potential.
Right.
So, I mean, in one phrase, perhaps the whole of my existence has been about realizing potential.
That's really interesting. I've also come across another company, a consulting company, that all their philosophical goals and all that kind of stuff are all about developing their own people to their maximum potential, and almost to a fault from the point of view of the client, who of course thinks they're the most important person in the world. You pointed out that it was for both. It was the potential of the clients, the potential of the people. But I think so often companies actually forget to mention their own people. It's all about the clients and it's all about their offer to the world. But if you've got that strong philosophy that we're here to do good for others, but we're here to do good for ourselves, that can be very powerful.
I like that. I learned a lot because later I became and the firm became, but it started with me, very involved with the advertising industry, which is a fascinating place. But one of the things I learned was that, and I learned from them, that you cannot deliver a message externally if you haven't also got buy-in to that message internally.
Absolutely.
And that is frequently forgotten.
It is. No, the most demotivating thing for a salesperson is to suddenly see the new advertising campaign for their product appear on the television and they don't know anything about it.
Sure.
And I've seen that. And the companies that work at getting, they understand that the brand begins in the center and the brand gradually goes out.
Yeah, the value. So that had a manifestation in some very particular physical ways. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it consciously, but unconsciously I did it. When we moved from Place to, so I got that wrong, it was Cornwall Terrace, looking over Regent's Park. And then we moved to 1 Cumberland Place, which was on the corner of Marble Arch, looking over the arch. Yeah. It was originally the flat of one of the big American, Bob Hope, I think, something like that. It was potentially beautiful, and I took it back to its original. Mm-hmm. But it was a crucible. In the middle was the reception area, and then it went off because it was on the corner, in 2 ways. Yeah. And my office was on the corner, and the boardroom was right in front. And that meant that people were constantly walking through the center.
Right.
And we had a look. I was quite interested. We were a young firm, but I wanted all of us to look a certain way. Mm-hmm. One of the things I said is our clients, who were then in the film industry, mainly, I said, our clients don't want us to look like them.
Right.
So we wore smart modern suits, and it kind of worked. And I gave a dress allowance, which was unheard of then. Right. I gave a dress allowance to the lady on the reception desk, things like that.
It's so interesting because it's so much of brand, and you said you were working with advertising people. As you know, that's my background as well. Is it so much that is about giving reassurance, right? So if you feel you're working with the right kind of people, and you've got the right product, you don't even mind paying more for it, as long as you feel you're in the right place.
Well,
And sorry, I'm just going to mention, because I know this is another area that something you did, which is you decided to call your firm Olswang. Can you just talk about that for a second?
I will in just a moment. I just
Sure.
want to stay with the physical,
Yeah, sure.
the office, because everybody was on view. And that was important.
Yeah.
The clients came and they could see everybody. And you'd have informal conversations. And it didn't matter whether you were senior or junior. And so I evolved very early on, one of my other mantras was every job is important. So it didn't matter how junior you were, you would still be walking through the center of the firm.
Right.
It was a little firm, but
Yep.
not that little by then. And later, when we moved to our eventual terrific offices, we took a whole floor of a building in 90 Longacre. It was an astonishing building, just by the Opera House.
That's Adland.
Adland. And I got an amazing deal on that. But I put glass panels in the walls around the reception area so that, again, you could see the firm at work.
Yeah.
And television screens.
All that stuff was 20 years ahead of its time at
Yeah.
least.
And it was saying that we are, I don't know, a lot of things, but I don't want to say proud of who we are. We're just happy to be who we are, but we want to share it with you.
Yeah. We're comfortable in our
We're
skin.
comfortable,
Yeah.
that was it. You asked me now about something else.
I asked you about your just to call the firm.
Oh, well, that
Olswang.
was funny. We were by then maybe 9, 10 partners. We were still in Great Cumberland Place. We were going to be moving. And I'd started the firm as Simon Olswang and Co. And then a little later, we grayed out the Simon and the and Co. So it was Simon Olswang and Co., the Olswang bit bold and the other grayed out. And then we were going to move. And we got a brilliant design company through one of my clients who helped us. So I was into that sort of thing. I was interested in it. And one of my partners, actually, he was a good guy, absolutely decent guy, but he said, maybe we should change the name of the firm to Olswang Devereux. My next partner was Mark Devereux, good English, aristocratic name. I said, why? He said, well, you know, we're not really a Jewish firm, but it sort of sounds a bit like that. And I said, is anyone worried about that? He squirmed a bit. And I said very simply, if anybody doesn't want to deal with this firm because it has a Jewish founder, they shouldn't deal with this firm. And if any partner is uncomfortable being here, they shouldn't be here.
Interesting.
End of story. So the design people came up with Olswangs.
Yeah.
And I looked at this and I liked it, and it had a script and everything. I said, there's only one thing, why is it Olswangs?
Yeah.
And they said, well, all the law firms, there's Linklaters and there's Freshfields and there's Slaughters, that's how they're all called. I said, yes, but it's not Armani's, it's Armani.
Yeah.
I said, we took off the S. And we were the only law firm at that time, and still pretty much, which just had that single name. So it became Olswang, the law firm.
Yeah.
And I stopped being Simon Olswang in the firm. I just became Simon.
Yes. And also you were, to an extent, naming your clients, who that's the way they used to name advertising agencies as well. They would never, I mean, Saatchi & Saatchi was known as Saatchi's, but it would never be called that. In fact, your story reminds me of an anecdote about the Saatchi brothers, which I don't know if it's 100% true, but it's a good story, that when they started off in Golden Square, they had a fairly small office, but with 2 floors, and they had 7 or 8 people. And then they would bring the clients before lunch and show them the downstairs, and they'd introduce them to a few people and then they'd take them for lunch, and then they'd bring them back and show them the upstairs, and all the people would go upstairs.
Yes. Could be true.
It might well be true, actually.
Could be true.
It's very interesting that you were working in that kind of environment. And in fact, I mean, so if you like, the frame for this conversation for me and what I'm really interested in is leadership. And I'd like to move us on to talk about leadership a bit. But I'd like to do that by you telling a story which you told me yesterday, which is about Diana Ross. And if you like, how I'd like you to tell us about you working with Diana Ross. That's very interesting. But also you told the story about Paris, which I thought was a very fascinating example of how people can be different with different stakeholder groups, if you like.
Yes, before that, in fairness to Diana, I must tell you how I met her.
Yeah, absolutely.
She came to interview me, effectively, whilst we were in our offices in Regent's Park. And it was a beautiful office on the first floor, and you came up a lovely Regency staircase.
Right.
And the conversation I had with her about her film project went well. And I was escorting her down these stairs, and she caught her heel in the hem of her long pink mink coat and started to fall down the stairs. And there was a quarter landing at the bottom where she came to rest in a bit of a crumpled heap. And that millisecond, I saw my life disappear. I saw an insurance claim far beyond any policy cover I might have had. And I thought, it's all over, and the headlines and everything. No. She turned to me and said, Simon, it's okay, I'm fine, you've nothing to worry about. And I fell in love with her at that second.
Yeah, she had the awareness to know that
Amazing, amazing. So I accompanied her later on a private jet to Paris. She was going to make the film of La Bécaire, all of Josephine Baker in Paris, this pre-war black star. And it was diva time. We arrived in a convoy of cars at the Plaza Atene. She went in. She was shown to her suite. She didn't like it.
No.
And the whole of the first floor had to move whilst she and her immediate people were accommodated to her satisfaction. Later, we went out to a meeting in the evening. We came back, by which time the fans had got to know about it, and they were all standing there, big lot. She got out of the limo, and I was with her, and went into the hotel with the fans on the right and the left under the canopy, and she stopped to do autographs. And I witnessed this. It was extraordinary. For those seconds that she was signing an autograph for each person, that person was the only person on the planet for her. It was extraordinary. And she was in no hurry. And she just took care of fans in a most astonishing way, and went into the hotel. So I saw the diva and I Diana Ross.
That is fascinating.
It was fascinating.
Of course, Diana I like because she's part of the family. I wonder where we're connected at some point.
With Ross, yes.
But I think that's a nice lead into, as you know, I have this thing that I've called mepathy, which is obviously a bit of a sort of joke on empathy, but it's the idea of mepathy is that to be a leader of anybody else, you need to first of all be a leader of yourself, and that mepathy is understanding very well the impact you have on others. And so if you have poor mepathy, then you for example, if you went into a hotel and got everybody to move and just think that it mattered, you would have poor mepathy. On the other hand, she might have wanted to make a point, perhaps, and perhaps she was very aware of what she was doing, so we don't really know that. But then on the other hand, when it came to a different group of people, her impact that she was having those people, I'm sure she was extremely
She knew
conscious.
about that.
Yeah. And yet so something different was driving her. So for me, that story is about leadership. In my definition of leadership, may not be people's, if they feel that leadership's all about leading others towards something. But I think the impact you have on people is part of that. So I'd be very interested, any thoughts you have on that, but also let's go on and talk about your own thoughts on leadership, because I know you have a lot.
Eddie, I don't think I discovered mepathy until I read your book.
Okay.
And had I discovered it a lot earlier, I might have done a lot better. because I don't think I really did understand the negative impact I sometimes had on people, being too aggressive, too pushy, just too much.
Interesting.
I don't think I understood that then, but I did understand something else. I did understand values, and I guess looking back, though I didn't give it thought at the time, integrity. And I think that you asked me to, obviously in anticipation of this, I've had to give a bit of thought to what is leadership. And I don't know what is leadership. I see it, I know it when I see it, but I don't really know what it is. That's your job.
Well, I think one of the things that's so fascinating about it, we can't put it in. It's you can't do a 3-year course at it and say you're good at it.
But I do believe, with the hindsight of quite a long life now, leadership is about values. And the guts, if you like, the quality, the integrity to stay with those values when they're challenged. That's the ultimate. That, you talk to Mrs. Thatcher, that's what she had. And I think when you look at great leaders, that is what they have.
Yeah.
And I don't claim to be a great leader. But when I set up the law firm, it's because the values that I had, I couldn't hold to them, the firm where I was.
Yes.
And so having my own firm was all about being able to practice law in a way that I was comfortable. It wasn't just practicing law, it was to be in law. And I've done other things that have nothing to do with law. And I think it's the same.
Yeah.
It is about core values.
Yes.
And that produces a culture. I want to tell a really nice story. We had a practice, we were growing. We were growing at about 50% a year, which isn't bad.
No.
And that meant that we had a constant flow of new people. And there was one young man, I won't mention his name because it's not right to, but I've got his picture in my mind.
Right.
And we had a practice before we employed somebody. We would have them meet the people they work with over drinks in the evening. And that was for two reasons. One, it was the final interview.
Right.
And there were a few times, not many, but a few times when, as a result of that, we didn't make the appointment.
Right.
Something came up, so it didn't quite tally. But it had another purpose, and that was respect, if you like, people they were going to work with, two ways. But it avoided parachuting people into a team.
Yes.
It was very interesting. So after one of those occasions, this young man came to me, and he said, "Simon, I'm really rather worried about the amount of people who are coming. I'm worried that we're going to spoil our culture." I said, he's not called John, I say, "John, how long have you been with us?" He said, 6 months. That's the answer.
Yes.
I thought that was lovely. By the way, he's since risen. He left the firm after I left, and he's now one of the most senior partners in a global American-type law firm in London.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
And that is not unique, I've discovered, because we meet together. That is not unusual for a whole group of people who were at Olswang and have gone on to amazing things in the legal profession.
Yes. I think differentiating colours are fascinating because they're so intangible and yet they're so tangible in a way as well. They're so difficult to describe and they can so quickly disappear. So you can kind of be in a sweet spot for a number of years where you've got the right people, you've got the right approach, everybody's so happy they've got each other's backs. And then a new person can come in or a situation can change or some kind of business kind of change in the marketplace and suddenly everything can begin to slide.
Sure.
And obviously growth is one of the things that makes that happen when you get twice the number of people and all that kind of thing. I think it happens tremendously. And in fact, just thinking, we were talking about Mrs. Thatcher, and I listened to a very, very interesting podcast about Mrs. Thatcher and her belief in the private, privatizing everything, and that one of the things she privatized was the water.
Mm-hmm.
And then famously, the big Australian company came in and bought up the shares and all that kind of stuff, and it all went extremely wrong because she just never thought that far ahead, right? It never occurred to her that she wanted to give the power to the people.
Sure.
Everyone can buy in and own the water company. And it didn't occur to her that some great big enormous shark would dive and gobble it all up from Australia. And I think in there's an interesting lesson, isn't there? Which is that, that I'm a big believer in holism, right? That there's all different factors. And you've got to be super careful that these factors that you haven't considered while you're doing your stuff might come in and eat your lunch.
Well, it's the law of unintended consequences.
Right.
Which is actually paramount. I don't think there's anything you can actually do to prevent that.
Yeah. And we're all in constant evolution. And in fact, we could talk about this now, I think. You've obviously passed through various different phases. You had your Olswang phase, you had what sounds like incredibly exciting years of building up Olswang and building...
And frequently, or sometimes terrifying.
Probably, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. But at the same time, it was yours, and you very much built it in the model you wanted. You got the people around you. But then it began to change, and then kind of you had to change.
Well, it was the market that changed.
Right.
May I stay for a second or two longer with the law firm? Because I talked about values and how to do things. There were a few things which evolved. As you talked about growth, and with growth you get factions,
Right.
You get politics. And I wanted the law firm to be a politics-free zone. How to bring that about? So I invented the phrase, no conversations in cupboards. And that was a catchphrase, so it was understood. But how to make that happen?
Yeah.
And I didn't know, but I found a way. And this was before the firm was too big. I remember there was a partners meeting, and I was talking about this. I said, let's start with me. I really want everyone around this table to say things that they want to about me. However negative, however uncomfortable, whatever. Now's the time. And it was shuffling. but it happened.
Right.
I said, that's it. So if you can sit here and say this about me, this is not a conversation in a cupboard. Those are the conversations you'd be having together outside this room.
Yeah.
But you've said it here to me.
Yeah.
That's what I want the culture of this firm to be.
Yeah.
That everybody should be able to talk about openly whatever is in their mind.
And how well do you think went?
Well, it worked pretty well until we got a lot bigger.
Yeah.
And I lost, to say I lost control would assume I ever had control, because I never did. But I think that I could say that I lost influence. And partly that was my own fault.
Well, it probably was partly to do with your own philosophy. Others might have been the other way around, wanting to control everybody, and you were trying to actually give up control. I think that what's interesting about it is, to a certain extent, I think that your biggest enemy there was human nature, which is possibly not a particularly good thing
Maybe
to take
including
on.
my own.
But people actually love talking about other people in cupboards. And so you're trying to stop something which is damaging. And certainly one of the things that, as you know, I'm a big fan of, I always say you can't communicate too much, right?
Yeah.
Because if you do communicate things, then you take away the oxygen of the cupboard conversation.
But actually it did work in another way. If somebody would come to report something and it hadn't come direct, I would kick it back.
Right.
I'd say, I can't listen to this. You have to come with X or whatever. You talk to Y about this.
Interesting.
I can't listen to that. So it was enforced. But there was another sort of strange thing, which I found now in later life, to the cost of everything, is we had no committees during the whole time I was in the law firm, until towards the end when I said I lost influence.
Yeah.
We had no committees. What did we have? Working parties.
Okay.
The difference between a committee and a working party is that a working party, first of all, has a defined job,
Right.
may change over time. Secondly, it has a leader.
Right.
And thirdly, it is time limited to whatever it's supposed to do.
Yeah. So I'm 100% agree
It
with
was
that.
an astonishing.
I actually would that, like in my book, I talk about projects. So it's a very similar idea where you very often take different people from different bits of the business, stick them together, and you give them a very clear objective, which might not actually be really what they do every day. And you say what we need here is to understand this in the next 3 weeks. And so as you say, put a time on it, put an objective on it, and then put somebody as the account leader of it. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And of course, the other thing about committees is that just going to it and sitting on it is work, but it's not. I mean, nothing gets achieved.
Useless.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And okay, so actually, what the other thing is, I mean, you set up the law firm, but you also at some point set up something else completely different. You set up a school, right?
Well, college, yes.
College.
I'm just, as we'll go there.
Sure.
In fact, it'll be a segue into it. But I said right at the beginning, and I've had to think, I spent my life thinking about this sort of thing. So I talked about values and integrity and when they're challenged.
Yeah.
But there were times when those values were challenged. And I'm going to mention two, no, 2 or 3, because I think they're instructive. I had a client, I've got to be careful here that I don't identify. I don't think early in the firm, but fairly early in the firm, I had a client who was a really capable and well-financed film producer. He wanted to do a project on a very interesting project on a criminal enterprise. And it involved engaging in prison with those criminals, but making payment to their family outside. And I said, no. I said, you have to find another solicitor. No, he didn't. He said, but those are my instructions, Simon. I said, well, one of the very few advantages of being an independent solicitor in private practice is that the client gives instructions and I decide whether or not to accept them.
Right.
And I lost that client.
Yeah.
But I've never regretted that.
Yeah.
There was another time when we were doing a big deal from a famous personality acquiring a really important franchise. And the agent, a well-known agent, a nice guy actually, but crazy. We were in a big boardroom, it was a critical meeting, and he was down the end of that boardroom, and he was really abusing whoever it was at the other end. He was yelling at him. I just had a feeling that he might be talking to my office. So I went up there, and I listened for a moment or two. I said, you're talking to my office? I said, no one speaks to my office like that. And I put the phone down. And it wasn't anything to do with me. It was instinctive that the value was more important than the consequence.
Right.
It was just instinctive. It was not tolerable that I could permit that to happen.
That's really, really interesting. Did you lose that client?
No.
No. Because of course,
and I didn't. Interestingly, I maintained a relationship with that agent because he really respected it.
Yeah. No. Well, I think people do respect integrity, and if you really stick to your values, it actually reminds me a little bit of a story of my own. where at one point, very foolishly, I allowed myself to be responsible for our North American market and responsible for our kind of corporate. So I had my corporate team and I had my North American team. And I was one day in a meeting with the North American team, and unbeknown, because they didn't know I was in the room, I was listening to my central team talking to them. And I was horrified by the way they talked to them, because we were the head office and kind of in charge of a lot of things. And I went back and said, I called them in and I said, look, I was in that meeting and I did not like the way that you were talking to what are also now my guys. It was a very interesting moment.
So I think leadership is about understanding where one's boundaries are and just basically what's acceptable and what isn't.
Yeah.
So you asked about the college. I just spent a moment or two. Our son, James, who was born shortly after I opened the law firm, turned out that he was, at the time, severely learning disabled.
Right.
Thanks to primarily my wife, Susie, but a lot of interventions. He grew up amazingly. And he was at a Jewish community school, residential school in Cheshire, which ended when he was 17. And there was nowhere appropriate for him to go. He was kind of in the middle.
Yep.
And there was certainly nowhere in the Jewish community. And the essence of where he'd been is that the religion was used as a structure, which was very important to someone who was learning disabled.
Right.
Anyway, we ended up being convened by the headmaster, two or three of us. He picked us out and he said, look, we need basically a tertiary college. And cutting a long story short, we created that, started very small. And it became a big community now. I was chair of governors for 15 years, and we now look after it. We had to move. When our graduates graduated, we ended up creating a community, and it's now in London. It's quite established. But what was interesting in this connection is that the Jewish community is very much divided between the kind of religious and the non-religious.
Okay.
And it's quite hard, or it was quite perceived as, and there are very few examples, of having a college which catered to the entire community.
Right.
So I managed to get the newly appointed Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, as our patron. He was absolutely wonderful. And I got a connection to the local chief rabbinate in Manchester, who were very powerful. And they wanted the college to be kosher. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, we supervise it and we have a guard there. We basically, effectively, we take control. I said, no, that isn't going to be. Well, how can we be recognized? So I agreed with the good guy, but the local head honcho. I said, we'll appoint as a cook anyone who you're comfortable with. They will be kosher. Setting up this college, which was really important to the people involved with it, it wasn't trivial.
Yeah.
But it was important right at the beginning to set off in the right way. And I knew that if we were under the control of the local Beth Din, the religious authorities, we were finished. So
because they would impose lots of rules.
Yeah, because it was out of our control. We could never know. And there was a cost as well. So I said to him, anyone who we have as a cook, you will approve. And you can come into the college at any time, unannounced. We are always open, but you cannot supervise.
Right.
And all the time I was there, that happened, that remained, and it was important.
Yep.
Later, I heard that they got control, and a lot of problems came as a result. I think so.
Interesting.
But why am I telling this story? Because to me, looking back, it was illustrative of something that I think is, I don't know what leadership is, but what I do know is what I said at the beginning. It's having values and having a clear view of what you're trying to achieve. And for me, if you've got those two, it's quite simple. It's not always comfortable,
Right.
but it is actually quite simple.
Yes. Yes, you know what you know what you want, and you know what you don't want. That's very helpful. I've always thought the word exclusive is an interesting word because it has good connotations, right? Oh, this is an exclusive club, an exclusive bar. But the reality is that exclusive means you're excluding somebody. And sometimes I think that this is one of the interesting things about the kind of thing you've been talking about, which is that, yes, we want to have the rules in this way because this is what we believe, but then somebody is being excluded because of that. It sounded like some important people were being excluded or potentially excluded.
Right. By definition, if you've got boundaries, then there are people outside those boundaries.
Right. Right.
I haven't really had a problem. It has sometimes caused me problems. I've been on a few boards since I left Olswang. But by the way, leaving Olswang was incredibly painful and difficult. Because although I'd wanted to make myself redundant, which I did, and I knew I wasn't always going to be there, and there were other things I wanted to do, I've alluded to this, by the end I lost control completely, and it wasn't really of my timing or my making the way it happened. And I was pretty washed up. I didn't know what I was going to do. And it took me probably a couple of years
that's
for
very
that to
interesting.
fall
I
into
think,
place.
I think people would be very interested to hear about, 20 years, your own place, you set it up in kind of absolutely with your own values, in the way you wanted it. And then we don't need to go into all the details, but you find yourself in 2001 kind of looking for the next thing.
I was beached.
And I think people would be very interested to know how you worked on that to get yourself into the next phase, which clearly, and I've known you for some of that time, and a very successful next phase.
Well, very, very lucky and fortunate. I don't know about successful, but maybe a word how it happened. What happened was that we'd created a law firm, and by then we had all aspects of communications, and we were the go-to place. But so much so that by then the world had become, with digitization, where we were the first law firm to understand digitization. And I created the law firm really around that understanding.
Right.
But when it became mainstream, the giant city firms were acting for the corporately and in everything really for the big companies.
Yeah.
And we lost our USP.
Yeah.
And we were a mid-sized firm. And we didn't have the power or the clout. And it was existential, not in the short term, but it really was. I could see the writing on the wall. My partners probably didn't see it because they were very comfortable.
Right.
So I didn't take me long with Susie. Susie used to say, if you can read, you can cook. And of course, this is true of the law. When I started, I knew nothing about about entertainments. I don't know if there's time. The story of how I got into that, maybe we'll come back to as an addendum, because it's a fun story. Well, I'll tell it very briefly. You can always edit it out.
Okay.
I was at my previous law firm. I said I'd got into entertainment. Through university, I knew a guy who'd been asked to be the line producer for Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the film that they made, the first film, and it was financed by pop groups. And pop groups were about 6 of them, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, among others. And they all had their own lawyers, and they were all the established firms, the entertainment firms. And they needed somebody to act for the production. And my friend, who was by then a friend, I didn't know him very well, but he came to me and he was the line producer. So I got to act for the production, company. And I mentioned before, it was the time of very high taxation.
Right.
And I'd been in a law firm that did a lot of tax, so I knew about tax. I wasn't a tax practitioner, but I knew about tax. And it made no sense, because if they would have lost the money, which is most likely when you put money in a film, they were going to get no relief. But if the film was successful, they were going to pay very high tax.
Right.
So I suggested a way of restructuring it, which was very beneficial. And the accountants thought that was terrific.
Mm-hmm.
The lawyers weren't so keen, because they didn't know what the hell I was talking about. And I discovered something, or something happened. I knew nothing. And I was presented with all of these long agreements, and I had to read them. And I didn't always understand them. Indeed, they didn't always make a lot of sense. So I asked about them. And two things I discovered. One, they thought I was smart. I wasn't smart, I was ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
Although it does, we might come back to the culture of always being ready to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
We might come back to that. So they thought I was smart and probably rather unpleasant and pushy. And I discovered that they didn't know, because they didn't know the answers, because that's how they always did it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
It was very interesting. It was very significant. So that had always stayed with me.
Yeah, well, essentially it's kind of the root of innovation, right? Thinking that you can do this differently.
I don't know. I think it's the root of integrity, really.
Mm.
So much later in life, I was on some boards, and I was always fascinated, didn't always happen, but whilst this was happening, we had the Enron crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another one, I think Marconi. There were a lot of financial crises. And each time, there was a pattern. And you had auditors and you had everyone, but nobody discovered it.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, why?
Right.
What happened? I remember asking the question at a very big board meeting with the auditors, a big firm. They didn't have an answer.
Mm.
But there is an answer. And that is, nobody asks the question. And people are afraid of asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
In my own law firm, this was an issue, and I used to say, because it was people, young lawyers don't want to ask questions because you're afraid of being made a fool of.
Right.
I said, there's no such thing as a stupid question,
Mm-hmm.
only a stupid answer.
Right, absolutely.
Now, that's not the whole truth, but this being ready to question, I think, is inherent in leadership.
I think that's very true. I did have a bit of experience that myself at the time of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
And I was working in a dot-com startup company, and we were constantly presented to by people that I thought that their ideas were mad.
Yes.
But
They were getting
I
huge
never
valuations.
used to say, I think this is completely mad, I don't see this working at all, because that wasn't the narrative. The narrative was it's all very interesting, and you know, banks were all going to disappear and supermarkets were all going to disappear. And so for me to say, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And looking back on it, I wish I'd had the guts to say, I don't think it's going to happen this way, because actually probably it's much nearer to what I thought would happen. It has happened. But at the time, I did not have absolutely the bravery to speak up.
Well, it can be foolhardy. It can get you into a lot of trouble, actually. I discovered that. I was on an important board, and I raised questions, and I never really got thanks for it.
Right.
It led to some very important results, good results, but I didn't win friends.
Yes.
I was seen probably as rather trouble.
Well, these things are difficult. Funnily enough, I've also got a Monty Python story, which is Graham Chapman, who you perhaps met him in that process.
Well, I knew him well. He
okay.
lived in Highgate even.
So he was. He didn't finish his medical studies, but he was very close to finishing, and he was looked after by my father, who was a consultant at Barts. And he went to my father and he said, I have been offered to go and do this thing with this group of people. We're going to be called Monty Python, something along those lines. And I don't know what to do. I don't know whether to finish my degree and become a qualified doctor or whether, and of course, you can imagine what my father said. He said, he would have said the same to me. Finish it and then do it. And if it fails, you can come back and be a doctor. And Graham completely ignored him, went off and did Monty Python, and the rest is history. But it's kind of also those moments when you have to make a tough decision. Must have been a very tough decision for him.
So going back to law firm, the market had moved against us. But if you can read, you can cook.
Right.
So I kind of worked out that what we were good at was not entertainment. What we were good at is interpreting talent to business and finance, and business and finance to talent.
Right.
And that was going to be true in the biotech was taking off. It was true of a lot of areas, including, strangely, energy. And I got approached by a firm that was strong in energy and international in places we weren't. But my partners were disinterested. They didn't want to go there. And I knew at that moment it was kind of over.
Interesting. Yeah, there's definitely I think as markets mature, there becomes this idea that these are the people who know how to do this. And I noticed that a lot in advertising, both as a client and even in my time in advertising, that very often an agency would win an account because they had done a similar campaign with somebody else, which I never bought that. No. It's like, well, as a matter of fact, I'm not even sure I like that because then they come with a whole bunch of preconceived ideas. And once again, in my work as a coach, one of the things I find so fascinating is how it doesn't matter what the person is doing. If they've got a team of people, they've got exactly the same problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, this failure to adapt to the market was a failure of my leadership.
Right.
At that point, my leadership was not really leadership. I take my eye off the ball, I was stale, I'd outlived my usefulness, whatever it was. At that time, leadership ideally would have been able to carry the firm with it.
Right.
And that kind of leads me to the importance of fellowship. You cannot be, I've learned all this later, didn't know it at the time.
Hindsight is very
It's the advantage of years.
Right.
You cannot be a leader if you don't have followers. And so understanding followership, generating followership is a critical part of it and difficult.
Well, I think that is very linked to meapathy.
It is.
Because it's sort of the idea that if you believe that you have followers, but you really don't, you can get in trouble quite quickly.
I like the word collect. I have used that quite a lot later in life, that when you need to do something, you need to get a group of people, you need something to happen. And I haven't heard other people use that word in that context, but I think in terms of, well, one's got to go and collect them. But I learned that very late.
Right. So that word collect implies that you do something to bring them towards you.
Yes, you know where you're going, but in order to go there, you have to collect the fellowship. And I don't think that I understood that nearly well enough earlier in my life. It was, I think, Shaw who said that youth is wasted on the young.
Indeed. Well, but also fascinating that you've been through this sort of classic S-curve of creating the firm, building the firm, and then reaching this inflection point where things really kind of start to go down. At least for you personally, the firm perhaps was still okay, but it did go on until 2017, but in a very different form and without you.
Since you're interested in leadership, the story of what happened to the firm is quite interesting to me. I had built, because I didn't intend to do it for all my life, I had built a very effective succession. In companies and organizations, succession management is, I think, the most difficult area,
Yep.
an area that is most commonly a failure. But I had a really good succession, too good, because at the end of the day, there wasn't room for me. But never mind. That team, 5 years later, the leader of that team had his ambition and offers from outside the legal profession. He's gone on to stellar things. He's a super guy. But they didn't provide then succession.
Right.
And after that, the firm meandered, never managed to get leadership.
Right.
And in the end of the day, if I use the word collapsed into CMS,
Right.
probably is actually what happened. It collapsed into CMS.
CMS is the firm that absorbed
Where it is
Olswang.
now, yes. Yeah. By then it was the rump of Olswang.
Right.
The really good people, most or many of them, not many of them, had left.
Had moved on. But this is a really interesting story, Simon. Thank you for being so open about it. Because what you're saying is you had a clear vision that you didn't want to do this for the whole of your life. Yeah. You'd achieved a great deal of success. You probably, in your heart, knew that perhaps it was time for you to move on to something else.
Yeah.
And yet, when that moment came, despite all that kind of good intention and good thinking ahead, you suffered.
Yes.
And so I think that is a very interesting reality, which was that it was almost like you looked ahead and said, yeah, we'll do all this. But when you got there, it wasn't quite as easy as you thought.
I don't know that I even thought about it enough, whether it was going to be difficult or easy. I just didn't get there. But if you look at politics, there are very few prime ministers whose exit has been what they wanted.
All political careers end in failure, isn't it?
Nearly all, nearly all, not quite all, but nearly all end in failure or an exit. And so,
but don't you think this arc of success, whatever it is, whether it's you've just got a job in business, and I can talk about this myself, I'm not going to now, but I think that when you've had something, you've been something, and you've kind of felt something, and sometimes it is that very kind of sweet spot, and then it all ends, and you have to come to terms with that. I read a really interesting article about pop stars, rock stars, and do you remember Suzanne Vega? I don't know if that name is. Well, she was very popular for a while, sold tons and tons of records. And in this article, she said she went to New York. She stepped out onto the stage of some venue, and it was a third full. And she just said, "I knew then it was over.
It was over.
I was finished."
Yes, yes.
And it was actually so interesting reading about that, because I thought, what a very refreshing, honest person. And she talked about the difficulty and then talked about how she moved on and did something else and bought herself a business or something.
There are people that I've looked at, and it would appear that they move effortlessly from one success to another, that whatever they're doing leads inexorably to the next thing.
Right.
That hasn't been my life.
Right.
Each time I've had to kind of start over. And I would love it to have been different. Well, maybe I wouldn't, because I'm okay with where it is now. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is what happened to me often.
Yes. And what did you do to help yourself to get through that situation?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I suppose, and I had help from outside. I think I came to understand that life is a circle. That I never knew what it meant, but it very, very much in the entertainment's world, they talk about what goes around comes around.
Yeah.
And I still to this day don't really understand what that means. But there's something in it that things happen if you're in the right place.
I think I'm personally very interested in the subject of resilience and why some people are resilient and some people aren't, and how some people can kind of appear to get strength from some very big negative thing happening to them. Other people just are finished off by it. I think that there's something in that as well to do sort of deepen our individual personalities, whether or not we're able to overcome things and move to the next stage. But it doesn't mean it's easy. Even if you're very resilient, doesn't mean it's easy.
Never easy.
No.
But I don't know anything that's easy. And why would one want it to be easy?
No, I agree. Well, pretty much anything worth doing is definitely not easy.
Sure.
Amazing.
So I don't know about leadership. I don't, it's your thing. I think what I know about is being. But one of the interesting things that I discovered after I left the law firm, I used to have a driver. It was before mobile phones were as they are, and I used to be able to use a car. I would work on the way to the meeting. My driver that would then, not a chauffeur, I didn't have a chauffeur, I had a driver. And he would then take the tape and the work back to the office. And I'd go to the meeting because I used to pride myself that if a client was on the phone and I'd say, I'm coming, I would stop the conversation, I'd jump in the car and I would arrive. And that was very well received.
Yes.
But how to do that without disrupting everything. So it was a real tool. And vice versa, I'd go to the meeting and on the way back I would dictate what had to be dictated and it would get typed up and then I'd send it back to the client. So that was very well received.
Interesting.
So the driver, and of course, didn't necessarily make me popular with my partners, that I had the driver and they didn't.
Yeah.
And he was there for a long time. But when he wasn't driving, he worked in the general office. It was before the days of instant communication. The general office was very important. And when I parked the car in the morning and drove in, I came up and I used to often, not every day, but often, on my way up, call into the general office and I knew everybody there and talk to them. Why? Because I understood that actually everything we did went through that office. Everything that came in, everything that went out, and then it later on became the Wi-Fi, the technical people as well. And I heard from this driver after I left that no one from the partnership ever visited the general office.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand that, but I mean, it was noticed. So it was a function of something that I really believed, and I used to talk about. By the way, I am to this day very bad on remembering names, but I knew everybody. And I'd walk around the firm, and MBWA I've since read, management by walking about.
That's right.
I mean, I never had heard of it at the time, but I naturally was interested because I understood that every job was important.
Right.
And I used to talk to people about it. And if they weren't going to do it well, they weren't going to stay in the firm. And I would say, and we'd have, you know, what you'd now call town hall meetings. We didn't know the term then. Every job is important. And if it's not important, it shouldn't exist. And it kind of worked.
Yeah.
And this sense of everyone being important. And to this day, some of the people who were junior in that law firm are still in touch with me, which is lovely.
But it is an interesting idea, and of course it's all linked to people's egos and their level of qualifications, that if you're a certain level in the firm, you don't need to speak to somebody who's at a lower level. And it's such a mistake, essentially, because so often those people, I mean, I think a great example in law firms is the person who greets people when they come through the door, the receptionist, and how they go about that, and how that person feels about their job in the firm.
Absolutely.
So if they're treated as a second class of human by the people in the firm, they're unlikely to be that friendly to the new clients coming through the door. And it all seems very obvious, and yet people don't do it. I remember when I worked in Saatchi, I always, because I've always been a bit of a handyman, and I always got on extremely well with the handyman. He had a little kind of office down in the bowels of the agency, and I would often pop down and talk to him. We'd have a cup of coffee together, and I would ask him questions about how do you wire up this or do this. And I remember walking down a corridor once, with a very senior member of the agency. And this guy with his bag of tools walked towards us and he said, "Morning, Eddie," as he went past. And the guy said to me, "Oh, you know all the best people." And he didn't mean it in a good way.
No, of course he didn't.
And I it's funny because when it came to moving office or something, guess who got their pictures hung first? You know?
Yes.
But not because I wanted anything.
No, because he knew you and cared about you.
He was a friend, you know.
Yes.
Curious. Okay, well that's really, really interesting. So maybe we could talk about a little bit something about now. So we talk quite a lot about the past and things that we've experienced. So I'm also very interested in leadership, and I'm very interested in change. I think leadership and change are very connected because very often the job of the leader is to bring about change.
I would say invariably.
Invariably. And I also believe that kind of everything is change, really. And if we kind of believe things aren't changing, we're probably kidding ourselves. And that the real job of the leader is an emotional one. It's kind of to make people believe, because obviously we don't really know where we're going, because if we knew where we're going, it wouldn't be leadership, it wouldn't be change. And so I think about my own career and the things I saw, the arrival of the internet and the arrival of the mobile phone. And when I started in such and such, we send faxes to clients. I would take my handwritten letter and give it to the secretary. She'd type it up. I would check it. I'd send it on the fax. So sending one message took sometimes an hour and a half. So we've seen a lot of change, and I'd love to get your views on the big change of today, which is AI. And I think it's such a massive thing that's happening. And I would love to kind of just get your feel on that for the legal industry or profession, but also just in general, how you feel that the world is going to cope with this new thing that's being tacked on top of everything else.
Of course, it's ridiculous for me to even try to answer that question.
No, but I'm just interested in what you think.
Because it's such a massive question, everyone's asking it.
Nobody knows the answer, so everything we say is valid.
I'm just going to jump back. After I left the law firm, I got appointed to the the advisory board of the private equity firm that financed quality solicitors. And I got the real hospital pass because I went to the first partners meeting in September, and the senior partner, you remember him, Lewis Elson, he turned to me and he said at the dinner, "I'd like you, Simon, to do the little speech at the next event, which is with the limited partners. It's the annual thing." I thought, "Oh, God, I'd like you to speak about the media industry." And it was awful because among the board of advisors, there was Charles Schumann, who was on the board of News Corp, and a partner in Allen and Company, which was the preeminent firm investment bank in that space.
Tough crowd.
I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? Anyway, I got some help. But what I talked about, I did manage it, but I talked about the business. And I said, the only constant in the media and communications business is change. That is the only constant. And I talked about on a beach, the waves come in and they go out. I said, if you're in finance, the trick is to catch the wave coming in and jump off it before it goes out. And that image has kind of stayed, and it's kind of stayed with me. And so many technologies, changes have come and gone. By the way, there was one thing that was always another constant, and that is you've only got two eyes. I remember the first one, the early times I went to Los Angeles, I don't know how it happened, but I was in the house of one of the big moguls. And in those days, there was no digitalization, but he had about 13 television sets around the place. Everyone was commenting on this. I thought it was amazing. And I said it was utterly banal. I said, this is amazing, but he's only got two eyes. He's still only got two eyes. Anyway, so AI, it's another change. Yes, it's a massive change. But I think, since you've asked me, I regard it as just another tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tool to be mastered,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's the important thing. If one looks at it and understands it, if mankind understands that it's a tool to be mastered, the concern, and you've got people like Noah Yuval
Mm-hmm.
Harari writing in *Sapiens* early on,
Yep.
the concern is that mankind will not master it, cannot master it, and it will master mankind.
Yeah.
But I don't think it has to be that way. And day to day, I think it's a tool. And
Do you think though, because actually it was because of you originally recommended me to read *Sapiens* by Harari and his various other books, and one of the ideas that comes through in that book is the idea that over history, mankind has done improvements, inverted commas, to itself, like moving out of the jungle and moving into villages and living together and planting things in the ground. And that has brought benefits, but it's also brought big issues like backache and disease. And one of the things that comes through in that is the idea that we're not good at limiting, right? So if we can do it, we'll do it. So we are going to develop the next mobile phone version, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think what's going to be very interesting is how would we expect the human race to make sure that we stay on top of AI and don't allow it to get on top of us? It's just, what mechanism is that?
I mean, it's a long time since I've read it, but I seem to recall that really, maybe it was between the lines, what Harari was saying is that just as Homo sapiens was a development from Neanderthal, it is possible that humankind, sapiens, will develop into a new sort of human, which connects to AI.
Right.
And that, I think, is
terrifying.
well, yeah, I won't be around to see that, but I don't know if it's terrifying because it won't happen overnight. But it could happen.
Yes.
That we could find that in different ways this superintelligence becomes part of our brains in some way.
I wonder if that
I do believe one thing, and that the world cannot continue as it is now. I don't think it's sustainable.
Okay.
So
do you mind expanding on that? That's an interesting statement.
Well, no, I think it's a whole nother
conversation. Give us a short version.
The resources are finite. Humanity, look, rich people consume more than poor people. The number of rich people is growing exponentially. The amount of rich people's requirements is growing exponentially. We hear all about electric cars being green, but we don't hear about the cost to the planet of creating the batteries in these electric cars.
Right.
You've got China and India to name two, but also Nigeria and Brazil. You've got vast numbers of people who are growing rich, and therefore they're growing to be consumers. Well, it can't just carry on like that. Resources, I'm a great believer in technology. I'm not a Malthusian.
Right.
And it's happening incredibly fast. If you look, you talked about change, and you said that change always happens, and leadership is really about leading change. But actually, for centuries, change didn't really happen. It's quite recently, 3 centuries, that change has really happened. And the acceleration of the rate of change is not very often spoken about.
Yes.
But that's what I find extraordinary.
So that's very true.
Something has to change. Something has to happen. And I don't know what it'll be, but I don't think humanity can carry on in the same way on the path that it has been, that it's on.
Are you optimistic?
I don't believe in optimism or pessimism, or I just am.
Yeah.
What's the point? I mean, what do I know?
I think what's so true, and I think what you just said about how the world didn't really change, and I think that actually is, I mean, obviously technology evolved gradually, and when I talk about technology, it might be things like better carts or whatever it was. And someone built a canal, and that was new technology. But it's almost like up until, I don't know, 1945 and the atomic bomb, everything was very organic. So you could have a tremendous war, you could have a tremendous flood, you could have a tremendous everything, but it would go back to how it was before eventually. Whereas I think we've reached the point now with nuclear weapons and other things that if there was a massive conflagration, it wouldn't go back to how it was before.
I don't strangely think that the worry, yes, but I don't think that the real change is going to be nuclear obliteration. It could happen. I don't personally believe it will. But I just think that it's the consumption that I think cannot continue.
And we might have to change our minds about what's a worthwhile way to spend our time, because realistically, and just to bring in the AI discussion back to sort of a little bit more to today, I think for me, one of the big changes that's going to come is that anyone who's involved in making content, their job is very much threatened. So have you noticed how in the newspaper lately there's all these top 10 places to have cups of tea in Brighton? Well, that's written by AI. It'll be fiddled about with by a human, but it's so easy to write that into ChatGPT and say, give me top 10 places to have, so that already the way that the way that news is being produced, the way that we're making content is changing. And that I heard a very senior journalist talking about how he's under tremendous pressure to get more AI and get rid of people below him. And what he said was, I get all that. The only thing is I'm not sure who's going to do my job in 20 years.
Yeah, because they won't have been trained and experienced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is tremendous change coming in that. But to your point, it's about probably shifting our perspective of what it is that's a worthwhile thing to do. And because we're not going to be able to sit all day at a computer writing things.
You asked if I was optimistic, and I dodged that. I think what I am is confident. I'm confident in my grandkids. I think somehow they'll find a way to be very immediate. I'm confident that things will evolve.
Yep.
Will it be comfortable? Undoubtedly not.
Right.
Change is not comfortable. It can be for some, but change has never been comfortable.
Yeah.
And we're going through a period of great discomfort. But is it worse than the period of the First and Second World Wars?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I like you, I'm very interested in history, and I read a lot, and I see movies and things. It's unimaginable. What happened in the First World War today is unimaginable.
Yep.
That 20,000 young British men would die in one day,
One morning.
Somme. One morning. I mean, unimaginable.
Yep.
And that the next lot would just line up and carry on the next day. So, I don't know, but it will evolve.
No, it will definitely evolve. I think that we do live in a world and society now where we put value on doing things and contributing. And so we're going to have to make sure we find a way to somehow or other feel valuable. Otherwise, a world where 80% of people don't.
Lady, you're a lot younger than I am, so you'll have the responsibility for doing that. I can just
I'm going to
watch with interest.
I'm going to sit in my bath chair and I'm going to watch my children dealing with all this.
Yeah.
But, okay. Well, I
you.
think we've kind of got a lot of great material there, don't you? So, Simon, I think we've had a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I'm very grateful for your honesty and openness about a lot of things that you've been through. And I think that people will get a lot of value from listening to you talking about your experiences, and you've met a lot of very interesting people. You've been involved in a lot of very interesting projects. So I am extremely grateful for the time you spent with us.
I've enjoyed it, Eddie. Thank you.
Good. Fantastic.